I find that if I don't bring up the climate crisis in conversation, even though people might be talking about, the crazy rains in Australia or in Pakistan or now in Nigeria, or the heat wave in the Arctic now. I mean, there's just all these crazy things going on. They might even mention that, but then they won't connect it back to the climate crisis. And so I say, yeah, this is, one of the effects of the climate crisis.
Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with amazing individuals from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green, and sustainable future for us, the planet, and all beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, a fellow plant eater and athlete who strives to optimize every living ecosystem, passionate about looking after this beautiful floating rock we call home and all the lovely creatures that live among it. That was Matt Schlegel, bestselling author of Teamwork 9.0 and founder of the Principal of Schlegel Consulting. Being an engineer by trade, Matt works closely with something called the Enneagram, which is the concept we'll be talking about today. He's led initiatives at many top companies, including HP and NewTek. Today we'll be talking about how you can apply those principles and initiatives perspectives in the realm of climate change and sustainability, specifically the work that he does with his local council. We know that real direct action starts from the community you are in today, right now. That's why I'm really excited to share with you this conversation with Matt and I. Enjoy. Matt, welcome to the pod, mate. How are you going?
So great to be here, Tom. I'm just delighted to speak with you today.
Likewise. I was actually looking forward to this one in a bit of a different way that I usually am for other conversations. And that's because I think your field of work is something, well, I haven't really dove into. So, as in the world of climate change and especially with policies, um, you know, governmental change is such a big deal. But a lot of the times, the immediate change comes at a council level. And so, what really piqued my curiosity about you and the work you've done in the past is actually working with those councils and different, bodies on emission reduction targets. So, I'd love to know what your way of thinking and perspective is when it comes to certain things like emission reductions.
Yeah, great question, and something I've been thinking about, a lot lately. So, just to pop up a level, I a consultant on a tool called the Enneagram, and I don't know how familiar your audience is with the Enneagram, but a lot of people know the Enneagram as a personality system. So people come into it, looking at it as a personality system, and that's how I came into it as well. And I had already been exposed to other systems to help people understand interpersonal dynamics. But I found the Enneagram much deeper and allowed me to better understand like intrinsic motivations of people. So I studied it more and more. And then I asked the question, why the Enneagram types, they use numbers to describe the types. So type 1, type 2, but why numbers? Why not colors or animals or stars or something, right? It's numbers. And so once I did a little more research and I found out that the reason why they're numbers is because that describes the order in which those dynamics appear in human problem solving. So essentially, the Enneagram is also a human problem solving process.
Mm-hmm.
So, I ended up, discovering that aspect of the Enneagram. And while there's lots of books out there on the Enneagram as a personality system, I didn't see any about the Enneagram as a problem-solving system. And so that's why I wrote my book, Teamwork 9.0, shameless plug there. And while I was doing that work, I'm also a climate activist. And so I'm thinking in the back of my mind, how can I use the principles of human problem solving to move the ball forward on solving the climate crisis? And so, after I wrote the book and did my little book tour, then I'm like, okay, now it's time to really start to apply these principles. And so, at the fundamental level, there's these 9 steps in problem solving. And step 1 in problem solving is understanding the problem, right? That's essentially the Enneagram type 1 is the one who says, hey, it shouldn't be like that. It should be like this, right? So that's essentially the first step in problem solving. Hey, there's a problem there. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like this. Well, step 2, sometimes they're called the helper, but they're the ones who have an emotional connection to help solve the problem. And as I thought about it more, I'm like, I think that's where we are collectively as, humanity, is we just now need to get more people to care about solving the climate crisis. So
Mhm.
we're really in step 2 now. And so once I came to that realization, I wanted to just try a number of different activities that would help people just engage with the climate crisis, because most people aren't. Most people are just kind of blithely going along day to day, living their lives while the house is burning in the background. And so I really wanted to understand why there is this disconnect between what is increasingly becoming aware, we're all becoming aware of the problem, but
Mhm.
how we still want to continue on our path, and how best now to engage people into the conversation, to get them to engage with the crisis, to care about the crisis, and then take some action ultimately, which is what we all need to do. So that's kind of a long answer to that, but that's where I'm coming from.
Right, that's a really good debrief on kind of the Enneagram and how we can start to think about big problems. Like, there's obviously a different scale of problems. That whole story of when you're 3 years old, your biggest problem is dealing with a broken crayon. You see these 3-year-olds crying, man, wait till you become an adult and you start dealing with things. And so at the top of the pyramid, with one of the biggest problems we're facing as a collective is climate change. So when we're looking at this Enneagram,
Yeah.
how are you I'd love to dive into some specific examples of how you think about, so you've worked with a city council before,
Right.
and when someone thinks of this and working with a council, it could be rubbish cleanups, it could be different subsidies. Which problem do you tackle first? You could be thinking of the 80/20 principle,
Yeah.
knowing that 80% of the results are going to come from 20% of the actions,
Right.
and kind of diving into that 20. What are these conversations that you're having
Yep.
with these city councils to try to curb emissions?
Right. And so this is, one of the things I've noticed is that, you know, if you don't bring up the climate crisis, nobody else will, right? Everybody is happy to just kind of let it be in the background and not bring it up. And so one of the things that I decided to do was attend every city council meeting and just bring up the climate crisis and remind the city council of our city's goal. So we have this goal of, and it's a great goal, by the way. It's reducing our emissions by 80% below 1990 levels by 2030,
That's great.
right? Pretty
Mhm.
good goal. And we're about halfway there. So I think we're just about at 40%. We've kind of taken care of all the low-hanging fruit, and now we're getting into the more politically challenging things that we need to do to get us to reaching that goal, and hopefully exceeding the goal. So um and I got the sense, as I started to engage at the beginning of the year with a lot of people who have been working on this for years, that the city council was dragging their feet. And so I started, it was on Earth Day. We had a big rally at our city, in front of our city hall, and the mayor spoke. And the mayor said, you really got to hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we get over the finish line. I'm like, oh, okay. So he's asking for help. And so I resolved at that point to show up at every city council meeting and remind the city council that we have this goal and we need to take action. And um, some of the city council members, you could tell the ones that I think we have seven, eight total. Three of them have been working very actively on this. There's maybe one or two who are kind of dismissive, and then there's a couple of more who will support it, but they have other interests, but they're supportive. So but just reminding them that we need to take this action and make sure that they keep pushing it forward was the one thing that I wanted to do. And I think it ended up being very powerful and helpful. I even and just as evidence of this, I have a contact in City Hall who told me that's at one of my little talks I gave at City Hall. Somebody transcribed it and sent it around to everybody at City Hall.
So cool. When you're having these conversations with like the city council members and you're going to the meetings and you're having your talks transcribed, and with these interactions that you're having, is the Enneagram then, are you using that based on the problem and how you're communicating the problem, or are you looking at their personality based on the problem with how to communicate? So it's like a how to win friends and influence people situation. I'm just trying to figure out how this relationship ties together for
Yes,
everyone listening, so we can better use the lessons to make sure that we can help make a larger impact.
right. Okay, so the answer to that is yes and yes. And that this is the brilliant thing about the Enneagram is, not only is it a problem-solving framework that allows you to, organize your problems, your thinking and your actions around problem solving in this framework, but you also now have a personality dynamic associated which each one of the steps in problem solving. And so as I get to know the city council members, and I'm familiar enough with the Enneagram at this point that I can start to get an idea of what their Enneagram types are. I know where they're going to be drawn to, what they're going to want to focus on. So when I'm talking to them, I can talk to them in their language. It's about if it's a type 1, it's really dissecting the problem. Or if it's a type 8, it's about really getting to action. Or if it's a type 5, it's about studying all the ins and outs of the solutions. Whatever it is, you want to within that team, you want to be able to speak their language and speak in a way that engages them and interests them, right? So that's the
Hmm.
personality side.
Yeah.
The other side about it, and this kind of gets back to my original comments, is we just need to keep people emotionally engaged with the problem, because if they're not going to engage emotionally, they're not going to passionately pursue the solutions. So I was thinking about, okay, who are my council members, what interests them. Like, one of the council members is really into trees and preserving trees and creating a canopy, and so when I'm talking to her, I'm thinking about how climate change is impacting our canopy, how it's the drought is killing a lot of our trees, our native redwood trees can't withstand the drought and the heat, and they're dying. So these are the things that I know will resonate with her. Another one of the council members has, some younger kids. It's like, now you want to talk about, hey, what are we doing to preserve a habitable planet for your kids? And you try to find a way to engage with them on an emotional level so that they stay engaged with solving the problem.
So why? So I'm seeing like I hadn't done too much research on the Enneagram before this conversation because I like to learn things and be authentic when I'm having these conversations. I didn't know whether it's almost a concept of problem solving. So like do this first and do that first and a way of thinking about it. Or what it seems like to me based on this conversation so far is actually uh, it is an influential way of talking. So I kind of would think of another way of thinking of it is like a disc personality. People are also familiar with that, the dominant and all the other ones. So
Right.
Enneagram, essentially, just to clarify, is to to use this in a way that is conducive to climate solutions. Someone, if they chose to, and if they were good at people skills and interpersonal skills, they could study this Enneagram. And then as they're learning more about it, they could go on to different scenarios where they're talking to business leaders, different entrepreneurs, philanthropists, counselors, identify which one of these Enneagrams that person is, which number. And then based on that, use their values and the way that they communicate to help educate on different solutions to climate change. Is that how you would use this primarily to try to?
Not primarily, but again, the Enneagram has two aspects, right? There's the personality side
Mhm.
and there's the problem solving side. And so what we're talking about now is the personality side,
Okay,
and and the bigger picture of getting people to engage emotionally, which is step 2 in problem solving.
got it.
Okay. So now let's just switch over to Enneagram as a problem solving and how I use the Enneagram as a problem solving solution for the council. So when I started looking at this back at the beginning of the year, the one of the things on the table for city council was to move forward with a heat pump water heater program. Okay, so when we look at the total emissions, and the city has already done an analysis of the predominantly where most of the emissions come from.
Mhm.
2/3 is from transportation, 1/3 is from homes. Okay, uh, so now knowing that, then the city said, well, where do we have the most influence? It's hard for a city to mandate, everybody use electric cars. you know, they can, they've done a good job of trying to make bike paths and things like that, but
Mhm.
they don't have, that's more of the carrot, right? Yeah, come on, use it. But people are still in love with their cars, and in as much as Palo Alto probably has the highest, where I think we're at 16%, so like 1 in 6, 1 in 7 people now have an electric car, and it's one of the
That's just
communities that has the
insane.
highest number of electric cars,
That's so cool.
because yeah, it is. It's amazing. But nevertheless, transportation, and they've even broken down, the cars by commuters, residents, and visitors, and it's about a third each,
Mhm.
right? So you're going to have different approaches to address each one of these.
Mhm.
But for residents, 1 in 6 or 7 of us now drive an electric car, so we're making progress there. But that's not where the city has the most influence. Actually, the city has the most influence on buildings, which is, 1/3 of the emissions, because they control the permits for buildings, and they permit whether there's a gas water heater or an efficient electric heat pump water heater. So they already have, foreclosed any new construction having a gas hookup. So from now on, new buildings in Palo Alto will have only electricity.
Awesome.
So that means, you've got to heat your home with electricity. Now, the other, in homes, we live in a pretty mild climate here, so we don't have a lot of, heating and cooling needs. So most of the heating goes into heating water for our baths and our showers.
Mhm.
And so what's the most banal way to burn down the planet? Heating water, right? So heating water with fossil fuels. We got to stop doing that. And so let's now replace our fossil fuel gas water heaters with these efficient electric heat pump water heaters.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the direction that the city had arrived at, by the time I started to engage in it at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I created this presentation and where I outlined, each one of these steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And then took all of the information I could glean from what they had already done and put it into this structured narrative of, hey, we've got this problem. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. Step 2, who cares? Well, we care as our community. We want to, be not contribute to the problem. We want to help solve the problem. What is the big idea? That's step 3. Let's replace our, dirty fossil fuel burning heat pump water or gas water heaters with these efficient electric water heaters. Step 4 is, what's the emotional reaction? If you know that the Enneagram types, 4 is that emotional, reacting emotionally. And, what are the objections going to be to heat pump water heaters? And gratefully none, because, like if you ask somebody to give up driving their gas powered car that they love, their ultimate driving machine or whatever, right? They're going to go, no, I can't give up doing that. But when you say, hey, do you mind giving up your gas, your General Electric or whatever branded heat pump or gas water heater, they're like, I don't care. I just want hot water, right? They don't have an emotional attachment to their water heater. So this is another area of the Enneagram that allows us to analyze what people's emotional reactions are going to be to solutions. And this is, an easy way to get people to exchange a fossil fuel appliance for a heat pump water heater, an electric appliance, without causing any emotional distress. And just to give you an example of an appliance that does give people emotional distress is there's a lot of cooks who love cooking on gas range, and they have their Wolf range or their Viking range. And it's like, you're going to take my Viking range away from me over my dead body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, okay, we won't do that now. Let's not go there because, in fact, gas burning on gas ranges for cooking is a very small amount of emissions compared to that of heating up water. Heating up water takes a tremendous amount of energy. So go for that one where people don't have the emotional connection and they're going to make the biggest impact.
Yeah.
So I laid all of this out in this systematic way using the steps of this Enneagram problem solving process. And I, presented that to members of city council. And I know that also got passed around widely within City Hall. So it started to, coalesce thinking about how to move forward with this program. And it felt like it re-energized the movement towards doing it and built momentum. And the good news is that at City Council meeting on October 3rd, they actually passed the program.
Incredible.
So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome. I want to
yeah.
dive into that a little bit more. So you're saying when you're structuring this presentation, you had the 5 different parts, and one of the more important key factors was
Well, there's 9, just to
9.
clarify. So the Enneagram is a 9-step process, and so you want to go through all 9 steps. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So when you're building this presentation on
Yeah.
PowerPoint or Canva or whatever it may be, you're thinking about these 9 steps, and they're all
Yes.
related to the way that you communicate different words or emotions?
Well, so each step, has, so I'll just briefly go through the
Mhm.
steps. So step one is defining the problem, and and the flip side of describing the problem is describing the world that you want to realize once the problem is solved. So like the vision for the future, right? So that's step one is your problem statement and your vision statement. And then step two is finding that group of people who care to solve the problem. So these are your stakeholders in solving the problem who have an emotional connection. Step three, once you have that emotional connection, you naturally go to coming up with ideas about how to solve the problem. So step three is the ideation step. Okay. And then you create this whole universe of different ideas. Now, for every time you throw out an idea without even thinking, you're going to have a reaction. It's like, oh, that idea is great, or ooh, that idea sucks, right? And that's step four, is that emotional response to the idea. Then, so 2, 3, and 4, if you know the Enneagram, they're the heart type. So these are very emotional aspects to problem solving. But then when you go to 5, 5, 6, and 7 are the head types. So now you get into the very analytical, logical side. So step 5 is where you analyze the validity of the promising solutions. So step 4, just to go back to step 4, is you take that set of promising ideas, the ideas that people have positive emotional energy, and then you bring them into step 5 and you analyze them and validate them. And then the ones that actually go through the validation gauntlet, then you build a plan around implementing it. And that's step 6. And then once you have your plan to get you to the goal, the finish line, then you go to step 7 and you promote that plan back to the community as a whole to get buy-in to move forward. And then once you get the buy-in, up from 1 to 7, all you've been doing is talking, right? Talk, 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 talk. Step 8 is where you actually do it. So now you go into step 8 and implement it. And then step 9 is where, whenever you do a transformational change in step 8, some toes will be stepped on, some feathers will be ruffled, and you need to go back to the community. How did that work for you? What's working? What's not working? And inevitably, you're going to find some new issues that need to be solved. And that's why the Enneagram is a circle, because it goes from 9 back to 1, right? And you just keep going in a circle of continuous improvement to get to a state where everybody can feel comfortable in the community and solve the problem, which in this case is reducing emissions
Mhm.
and resolving the climate crisis.
Awesome. That's a really good breakdown. Thanks for that, Matt. And I just want to clarify a few things for people.
Yeah,
So, just saying 1 to 9 is a circle, so it always follows this order. So it's always 2 after 1, it's always 4 after 3, etc.
that's right. And people, and here's a really interesting thing that happens, Tom, is that people play to their strengths, right? So if I'm a type 6, for instance, right? So I'm really good at planning stuff. I love doing that. So, that's where I want to naturally jump ahead and do that. And we all kind of want to do that, jump ahead to whatever number is, whatever step in problem solving that is our strength. Um, but we need to, if we're aware of that tendency in ourselves, then we can kind of rise above that and make sure that we do go through all the steps systematically. Because when I've talked to teams that are struggling and we break it down, it's like, oh, we skipped a step. If you skip a step, then you're going to struggle. So it's better to just take the time and go through all the steps systematically.
Perfect. Look, you've got this presentation, right? Or you want to instill a change in this case. In your case, we're talking about heat pumps, but let's say I work somewhere and I want my company to reduce their plastic use, or maybe to have meatless Mondays or whatever that is. And you know who to contact, which I think was probably before step one, knowing where to go or whatever. You could really do this for any scenario in which you want something to happen. You could find what exactly you want, firstly within yourself, and then you produce this step, and you can talk to uh, businesses, you can talk to your boss, you could talk to your partner, you could talk to your family, household. Is there like a limit there, or is it pretty much open source?
It's look at, I mean, that's the brilliant thing about this. It's you can do it at any scale. You could do it at the individual level. You can do it just for yourself. You can work through the 9 steps yourself. You can work through it with your family. You know, whatever challenge or issue that you're having, you can just step back and say, let's just start at the beginning, make sure we all agree on what the problem is. Let's all agree on where we're trying to get to. Let's make sure that's step one. Then let's make sure that everybody who's involved, even if it's your family, right? It might not be just your immediate
Hmm.
family, but there might be extended family members, or there might be friends, or other associates of the family that you need to bring in to solve the problem. Let's make sure we include them in the conversation, and then you move to 3 and get everybody's ideas about how to solve it, and on, right? So it's completely scalable, um, because because we're humans, it is the way that humans solve problems. So that's the beautiful thing.
That's really cool. And I want to follow up with like another question there. So when we've got, say, in your example, let's, because I think council meetings are really cool. Um, that sounds like a really nerdy thing once I've heard it come out of my mouth, but this is where we
They
know.
are. Well, I'm just going to agree with you right now. Yes, they are cool.
And for someone who's interested in, curbing emissions, climate change, sustainability, environmentalism, councils can get things done like pretty much straight away. Like it's so quick. Whereas if you're looking at like a federal, national level, it takes so long, and there's so many steps and legislation and processes you have to go through. So I want to harp on the council concept for a moment. So
Yeah.
let's say in someone's local council or municipality, they want to maybe bring in more bins or plant more trees or do the heat pump thing like you did. How does, like, you obviously started by going to meetings, right? And then how does that work in terms of, do you have to like just build confidence and make a call or an email, just pitch it? How do you get yourself in a position in which you're talking to the people who can make the change happen?
Well, so great question. And, the first thing that I did, and that I would recommend everybody do, because I think it's key, is to find other people in your community who feel the same way you do, right? So this, this is a you're essentially building a grassroots movement. You're essentially building political power through numbers, so that you when you're going to these meetings, you're not, you may be the voice, but people know that you're the voice for a group of people who are also thinking the same way.
Hmm.
and and that becomes political power. So that, I would say that that's the first thing, and that is step 2. And that's what I'm really focused on right now, because I believe we've got a problem, and I have a vision for the future, and I am trying to find like-minded people in my community who want to help me realize that future and get us to a point where we're not burning fossil fuels. And so, but whatever your thing is, whether it's reducing plastics, or reducing food waste, or making more, non-meat options available, or whatever, right? Is, you have to build a, a coalition of people who feel the same way, and then come up with that vision that you can start to promote and build even more political power. And and then, once you've done that, and you have this group of people, then you can start to think about, well, what are, good solutions? And you move into step 3. What are good solutions that we can now, if your city council isn't already doing something that you can just, you know encourage them to implement. If they're not already, start to give them ideas that you think are feasible, engage with them in conversations to have them, get their feedback, which is the step 4, that emotional feedback on those ideas, so that then you can move the positive ideas through into step 5, which will probably involve city staff to analyze it and realize what, the impacts will be on the city, the cost impacts, time impacts, staffing impacts to implement, and impacts on maybe the business community or the residents. That's the step 5. And then once you have that information, then you can continue to move on to planning, bring that back to city council for a vote. That's 7. And then you get the vote. Then you move to 8, implement it, which will be, whomever, city staff, or a combination of, like, for our program, it's going to be a combination of city staff and residents, because we need to actually go feet on the street and educate residents in our city about this program, and get them to buy into it, so that they will exchange their water heaters. So you just need to move through all those steps in the process to get the end result that you want.
I love when things are a step process. It is quite a big deal to bring across something especially, like, I'm thinking, for an introvert, this must be hell of some kind, because everything seems to come back to community, to grassroots, especially when it comes to climate change, and especially when it comes to implementing that change in a direct way that directly impacts you and your neighbor and everyone across. So that's really incredible, and I hope that a lot of people have a bit more clarity on different ways that you can accomplish change, because this is just one of the many, many ways that we can accomplish change. And I really wanted to have this conversation to share different ways of thinking, because I find that sometimes, we're trying to feed a fed horse and dealing with the same problem in the same way and not getting the results. So I was really keen to have a different perspective on how we can deal with problems. But on the tail end of this chat now, is there anything else you think we should know about the Enneagram and problem solving, or any other wisdom you'd love to leave us with for today, Matt?
Yeah. Well, so one thing, you know, you mentioned that this must be difficult for introverts, and there is a role for everybody in this. So, for instance, the type 5s are almost always introverts, but they're the analysts, and we need those analysts, even though they're introverted, to actually help us validate the ideas. And we need the extroverts to be out there engaging with the community, and building support and getting ideas and all that. So there is a role for everybody in this process, and it's so important that we acknowledge that and find a way to make space for everybody, because everybody can contribute in whatever you're doing. And then, and my final thought is, my focus is getting people to engage emotionally with the climate crisis. And so I've landed on one thing that I'd like to share, but I think it's important, whatever issue is important to you. And that is, just bring it up in conversation. I find that if I don't bring up the climate crisis in conversation, even though people might be talking about, the crazy rains in Australia or in Pakistan or now in Nigeria, or the heat wave in the Arctic now. I mean, there's just all these crazy things going on. They might even mention that, but then they won't connect it back to the climate crisis. And so I say, yeah, this is, one of the effects of the climate crisis. And so, just make sure that you bring that up and help people connect the dots. And in as much as you can, make it personal to them. And that's another thing, whatever issue, try to personalize it. So how it's going to impact them and how they can impact the solution, that helps them build that emotional connection. But it's really, building that, the coalition of people who are going to get something done. It's about making that emotional connection to the problem.
Beautiful. What a well summed up episode. If you didn't catch anything, but you just got that last 2 to 3 minutes, I think you're pretty sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Matt. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone got something out of the conversation. I definitely did, and learning about the Enneagram and different ways to solve the problem. It's something I'm definitely going to be Googling after this. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Matt, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate the conversation.
Hi there. Welcome to the end of the episode. Thank you for listening and or watching the whole way through. If you enjoyed this conversation, the best thing you can do to support the show is share this episode with a friend, family member, or colleague. And if you've still got time, give us a 5-star rating on Apple iTunes or Spotify. Thanks again to Matt for coming on and sharing your wisdom. That is all for today's episode. I will see you guys on next week's conversation. Stay happy, eat plants. Peace.